Being a millennial is basically synonymous with going to therapy. At least according to most of my friends and the people that I talk to about therapy, everyone's just kind of like, oh, thank God for therapy. So when I was taking some time this weekend, I basically just went to a coffee shop, spent some time journaling, some like reflecting, and I was thinking about all the different things we could talk about on this channel. It's crazy that in our world today, you can just give me like a microphone and a camera, and I'm allowed to just record things and share my opinions on the internet, but I digress. When I was thinking about the different things I could share, I kind of like jotted them all out on my iPad here. So some of the things that made the list was power, reasons people need or get therapy, which is going to be this video. How to survive a cult 101, because I have survived and escaped actually 3 cults, which, stories for another time. Sex, energy, and chakras, how to use sexual energy to kind of manage yourself, your own energetic system, get like resources from God or source. And then also an element of like sexual healing, BDSM, and kink. So we'll save the rest of those for another day, but as you can imagine, if I'm able to talk about all of those things and I am well versed in the experience of those things, you can bet your bottom dollar that I have been through a shit ton of therapy. So after having gone through all this therapy, one of the most common questions I imagine people asking on the internet is, how do you know if you need therapy? Right? Almost everyone in today's day and age has been through what we would consider big T trauma, something that legitimately has been jarring to your system, has caused just some kind of a fissure in your experience, maybe has some issues with like memory repression, or everything seemed fine, but it also doesn't seem like I'm fine. I don't know exactly how you would define it, but something comes up in you and you're just like, I don't think I'm okay. Like, I don't think I'm handling this very well. So I figured we might as well start by talking about the reasons people go to therapy, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit about when you might be done with therapy, because I know for a lot of people, therapy just kind of becomes this consistent thing that they do, and then they're just talking about the problem and talking about the problem ad nauseum and never really getting past that into a place of power where you can then help and empower others on their journey, right? And that doesn't mean you need to become a coach or you need to become a therapist or anything else, but I think that we all have a general call for leadership and to help the people behind us. This is something that has existed for centuries. It's known as mentorship. It's known as, like being an elder in the community. There are a lot of different ways to approach this, but at the end of the day, it's really just about being able to give back, and it's hard for us to give back. We can't pour from an empty cup, but if we think of ways that we want to give back, a lot of times first we need to make sure we're okay, right? And therapy is one of the best tools used to make sure you're okay. So I'm going to check my notes over here. When I think about therapy, I think that at the end of the day, everything we experience is about what we can and what we can't control. So typically what I see when someone considers going to therapy is that something is happening that is outside of their control or perceived control that they do not like. So this could be something as in like a pattern where they just keep having the same kind of pattern come up in their relationship. It also could be a reaction where anytime they are faced with a certain challenge or scenario, they react in a way that they do not like themselves when they're in that reaction. So a lot of people seek out therapy to kind of understand the system of them. Say, hey, this kind of like comes into my world and happens in my system, and then all of a sudden I react, and this is what happens, and I don't like this. So can you help me fix me? And then there's the phases of therapy. So when I have noticed people going through the therapeutic process, and again, I'm not a licensed therapist, I just have spent a lot of time in therapy, and a lot of my colleagues are therapists, so we have these conversations often. So knowing the different stages and phases that people go through in therapy. The first stage is typically known as just like radical acceptance and being able to express what happened and be witnessed. And this is typically done through basic talk therapy or just general psychiatric care, right? So just knowing, not psychiatric, I guess it'd be psychological care. I don't know. So the first step is really just this acknowledgement, right? It's you being able to say, like, sometimes when my dad got home, he would be really angry with me, and that made me feel small, and it made me feel insignificant, or it made me feel unwanted. And whatever those feelings were, they're completely valid. And typically the first stage in therapy is just being able to admit it, being able to say it, being able to talk about it, and be heard. So for a lot of people, without knowing it, they've kind of gone through that first phase of therapy if they have a really solid support system. Sometimes this can come in the form of like a religious container or a friend group or a community place where you can share your story, share what happened to you or what you remember of what happened to you, and it will not be judged. It just be a thing that happened that people want to share in or experience, and they simply witness. They say, wow, Thank you so much for sharing that. And if you do not have a supportive community and you feel like you've never really been witnessed, I would encourage you to go to therapy, if only to give yourself the gift of that acknowledgement that just, this is who I am, this is what it feels like to be me, this is what it felt like when I experienced this, and really process through that. Okay? Now, if in your childhood you experienced trauma and to the point that your system couldn't handle it anymore, maybe you shut down, maybe you have little gaps in your memory of those types of things, maybe the stuff that you do remember is literally too painful to talk about, there are a lot of different modalities inside of a therapeutic container that many therapists are formally trained in, like EMDR, subconscious reprocessing, NLP, many different things that they can bring in to assist your conscious mind in being able to go back through and to understand what happened and to be able to witness it yourself without re-triggering or traumatizing yourself. So if you feel like you're maybe in that initial stage where you're just needing to kind of walk through everything that happened and kind of put the pieces together, therapy is a phenomenal place. If you feel like you've kind of gotten that from your community or from your friends or maybe from a partner who's been able to witness that, fantastic. Then you might not need that first section of therapy. So typically after the first phase, after we've been witnessed, we've said, this is my story, this is how it felt, this is what I experienced, and this is like really what it meant to me, then we come into the reconciliation period. So typically in the reconciliation period, you have to now realize like what happened then is not happening now. And sometimes this actually requires reprogramming your nervous system because it can get triggered, right? Your brain doesn't know something that's happening now versus something that happened in the past when you're recalling that memory. So reprogramming your nervous system and then being able to reconcile that you're okay. You're okay right now. You're not being threatened right now. You're able to be you right now. And that is no longer your reality, right? You're no longer a child. You are now a functioning adult with lots of different resources at your disposal and many different methods of agency that you might not have had when you were a child. So now we need to reconcile that, right? We need to integrate back the parts of us that felt like they didn't have a voice or weren't able to make choices and decisions on their own, and really bring all of that back into our system. And when we bring that back into our system, a lot of times that also includes the forgiveness and the letting go of the people and the circumstances and the actions that were taken that we felt really were harmful to us. So a lot of times there's a lot of forgiveness in this. It's realizing like, I did the best that I could, or they did the best that they could, or they didn't realize what they were doing, or they weren't taught differently, or whatever is going on, right? It's really just kind of coming into not just acknowledgement, but I would say that the second stage here is really about acceptance, right? Bringing all of that back in. And this is also what I would consider in the transformational process integrating, right? So in transformation, you have the kind of like the solve et coagula, right? The disintegrating, right? Where you are kind of like breaking everything down, letting it all go to mush and to goo and it be emotional and oftentimes a lot of snot involved. And then there is like the transformation and integration, right? Which is, this is my new way of being. I'm okay now. Here's me whole again, right? And then the last stage is really the impact or the implementation of that. So if we have integration here, we have the implementation here. So once you have implementation, you are now able to regulate yourself through your consistent experiences and also use the tools you gained in these two elements to reparent, to reprogram, and to reassimilate yourself in your environment so that you are no longer out of control. You take on full ownership of your own experience, realizing everything in your life you either create or allow, and by taking ownership over your entire life, your entire story, saying, it's not my fault that that happened, but it is my responsibility to handle my reaction to those things now, right? It's not my fault that this dynamic existed in my family of upbringing, but it is my responsibility to support myself so I am capable of being the man or the woman or the person that I believe that I am supposed to be today. And whatever resources I need, it is my responsibility to seek out those resources, and whatever guidance and whatever grace and whatever everything else, it is my job. Now I take full responsibility and I take full ownership over my entire life and my experience. So those are the kind of the three stages, right? First, there's breaking everything down, being witnessed, it happened, what happened to you, and the feelings you have about that are valid, right? And kind of going back through that and creating a safe space for that. Then there is the reconciliation. Even though it happened, I'm okay now, and this is me now. This is who I choose to be now, right? And then there's the last stage, which is really where you kind of take back the reins and you're now able to actually take control of your environment and ultimately take responsibility for everything that's happening there. So I'm just going to check my notes one more time. So that's kind of the process, right? That is the overall therapeutic process. If any of that feels like something that you would really love to experience and you have not, therapy might be a great fit for you. Right? There are therapists at every single level of this journey. There are therapists that can transcend multiple levels. There are many other options if therapy is not an option for you. If you have limiting beliefs about therapy, if therapy is not accessible in your state, if it's not accessible to you financially, I would encourage you to kind of break down overall what's happened to you, which stage you might need the most support in, and then honestly ask for that support. And you'd be surprised. A lot of this support is more accessible than you would think when you realize what to ask for, right? If you just ask for a therapist, you're going to get someone with a license, and someone with a license may have specialties or may have expertise, but the more specific you are with what you ask, if you say, I really need help reprocessing what happened to me in childhood without getting triggered, right? I really need help reconciling things because there are just certain people in my life that I feel like I cannot connect with and I do not feel safe with. Or I've done all of this learning and I've read all these nonfiction books and done all the self-help work, but I don't feel like I'm living it. I feel like I still kind of get triggered here and there, and I feel like I don't know how to integrate and then implement the knowledge that I have so that it actually becomes something I can use on the day-to-day basis. So I'm going to tell you right now that a lot of the stuff we discuss on this channel is not going to be for the first two categories. Today, the stuff we're going to discuss on this channel is really meant for the third category, for the people that have been through some of the healing process, whether it was in a proper therapeutic container with a coach or honestly with a very supportive community that was able to say like, okay, let's just let that go. Let's move on. Let's accept that. I love you for who you are. A lot of this in the right communities can happen naturally, right? It doesn't necessarily require a therapeutic container. However, there is absolutely, and I want you to hear me here, zero shame in requesting therapy, in seeking therapy, in getting help. That is actually part of being a fully healed adult, is realizing where you lack the resources or the knowledge and honestly seeking that out for the betterment of yourself, for your family, for your future, for your community, for your job, for everyone that you stand to influence. Seek out the help that you need. But if you've done the work and you really have sat with things, you've been able to go back and acknowledge that just for yourself, you've been able to reconcile your relationships, and now you are in more control over your life, but you start to like say, I get that, and I understand that this is probably my abandonment wound getting triggered, and I can see that getting triggered in me, and I can use different tapping things or different elements so that I can bring myself back into my body. I can do some breath work, and now I'm here, but now what do I do with this? Or maybe you have darker elements, maybe some of the different like Jungian types or the shadow elements that are operating within you that are driving you to do things that make no sense. And you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm still in this pattern, right? I thought I did that healing work. I thought I did this. Y'all, healing's not linear, right? Healing is very cyclical and is almost like a spiral. Right? So you will see the same tree over and over again. You'll see the same wounding over and over again. You'll say the same pattern, right? And this is why my entire concept is about taming dragons, right? The idea is not that we get rid of the things that cause the pain or cause the hurt or cause the breakage in our system or our psyche. The idea here is not that we kill off those things or we eradicate them completely. The idea is if we think of those things like dragons, that we learn how to tame them. Because those elements do not get smaller, you get bigger. And the more dragons you can learn how to tame, the more effective you will be at mastering your entire ecosystem. And once you have mastered or gained a level of mastery over your ecosystem is when you can step into the capacity to lead others. And that's really the goal, because in today's day and age, regardless of your beliefs, we need leaders. We need people that have their shit together just enough to be able to step into a place of power and lead the people that are just behind them. And the longer you sit in shame, wondering, oh my goodness, it's not that big of a deal, and I know it wasn't that big of a deal, and I'm not sure I can even trust my memory of this, but it keeps me up at night, it gives me nightmares. Get help, friends. Get help. If you think you need therapy, you probably need therapy. And if you know that you've been through therapy or you've done the work and you no longer need therapy, the next step is to take action. So figure out where you are in this journey, be willing to ask for help, acknowledge that everybody needs help at some different level in their life, realize where you're at, get the help you need, and then know when you're done. For a lot of us, we can get into kind of the self-help spin cycle where we're just basically going again and again and getting another therapist and another coach and reading another self-help book, and then we're never actually going out into the world and actioning this. And I think that that's a tragedy, to be honest. And I've spent a shit ton of money on therapy. Like, I calculated it one time, and I think all total, considering coaching, therapy, and different like experiences I put myself through, I probably spent about $500,000 just developing myself to be able to talk about these concepts publicly, to be able to share my story and things like my experience in the cult, things like my sexual abuse story. Like, and I will share all of those things with you here because I've done the work. So if you're at a place where you want to do the work, let's have a conversation. And if you don't feel like you have anyone that can have a conversation with you, get a therapist. And if you're too afraid to get a therapist, or therapy is just something that you are unwilling to do, seek out someone like myself or another mentor or coach or someone who has done the work themselves and can guide you through what they did, and you may be able to replicate that in your own life. But take accountability for what's going on in your life, and if you think you need therapy, you probably do.